In the third module, we will discuss how every life is value and why we believe that every child deserves a chance at life.
There are only 4 differences between the preborn, which some say is not human, and the newborn, which they say is human. Let's examine those 4 differences and see if it still makes sense to say that it's okay to kill preborn babies, but it's not okay to kill newborn ones. The first difference between a preborn and a newborn is their size. Of course, the preborn is typically smaller than a newborn. Some even object by saying, how can you call something the size of a dot a human being? That's a good question. How can something so small be human? Well, why can't something so small be a human being? Are large people more human than small people? Men are generally larger than women. Does that mean that men deserve more rights than women? Kevin Hart and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson are 2 different sizes. Is Kevin less valuable just because he's smaller and Dwayne Johnson more valuable just because he's bigger? If size has nothing to do with the value of a human being, then how can we say the life inside of its mother is of less value simply because it's smaller? The second difference between a preborn and a newborn is their level of development. I've heard people ask, how can something that's not fully developed yet be a person? Or how can something whose brain is still developing and who's not even self-aware be a human being? Well, imagine if your development or abilities determined your value as a person. A person's brain is still developing well into their 20s. A 6-year-old's reproductive organs aren't fully developed like those of a 16-year-old. Is that 6-year-old less of a person than the teenager just because she can't get pregnant yet? So what makes a baby in her mother's womb any different? The little child is as much developed as you'd expect it to be at that stage. If our level of development has nothing to do with our value as a human being, then how can we say the life inside of its mother is of less value simply because it's less developed? The third difference between a preborn and a newborn is their environment or location. Is the unborn really a person if it's not in the world yet? Well, they are in the world, just in a different location. Just think about us. Our environment is always changing, but we know our personhood always remains the same. So let me ask, if the value of personhood is determined by one's environment, does that mean our value changes when we move from place to place? Is an astronaut less human than us simply because they're no longer on this planet? If our environment or location has nothing to do with our value as human beings, then how can we say that life inside of a womb is less valuable than ours simply because it's in a different location? The last difference between a preborn and a newborn is the degree of dependency. People often ask, if the unborn is totally dependent on its mother, then how can it be a person? I'm curious, why can't something so dependent be a person? There are many people who depend on others for their survival. For example, there are those with pacemakers or who are on life support in hospitals. Others are on dialysis machines or take medicine like insulin in order to survive. Without these life-saving elements, people will die. Those inside a plane are dependent on pilots. Passengers are counting on them to get them to their destination. Similarly, babies in the womb are counting on their mother to get them safely into the world. After all, the safest place in the world should be a mother's womb. A 20-month-old toddler can do many things, like play around and run around, but good hygiene, putting on clothes, and eating healthy are not some of them. So just because a baby still relies on her mother for all of these things, she's not any less human. So what makes a baby in a mother's womb any different? If personhood isn't determined by our degree of dependency, then how can we say that a little boy or girl's life inside of their mother's womb is less valuable than ours simply because they rely on their mother for survival? It seems pretty clear that when we look at each of the elements in the acronym SLED, size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency, none of them define our personhood or our value as human beings.
So I'm on the campus here at Cal State Fullerton in Southern California, and I'm going to see if students are willing to be so progressive that they're willing to sign a petition to legalize late-term abortion. How late, you ask? Well, it's so late, the child has already been born. Post-birth abortion. Let's find out, see if anybody's crazy enough to sign this thing. Hey, Chief, you want to sign a petition to legalize late-term abortion?
Sure.
It's late, it's post-birth. Yeah, well, it's after the child's actually been born. It's within the first 30 days is the idea, is the concept. So the child is fully healthy, fully good, but sometimes it just does a number on the parents, you know what I'm saying? And we want to make sure that they're able to do what they want to do. Would you be interested in signing a petition to legalize late-term abortion in California?
I would, but I'm a permanent resident. I'm not a U.S. citizen.
Okay. Well, thank you. She would, but she's not a U.S. citizen. Are you pro-choice?
Yeah.
If you'd be interested in signing that. It's so late. It's actually post-birth abortion. Sometimes parents have a hard time trying to distinguish. Does that sound like something you'd be interested in? Yeah, so the child is, is fully healthy and viable and stuff, but sometimes it's just too hard on the parents, and the parents need to make that late term, like so late term, the child's already been born within the first 30 days. That's what's been argued before Congress. Is that wrong?
I mean, I'm pro-choice, but if it's a baby already.
When does it become a baby?
I know it gets heartbeat at 8 weeks, I believe.
21 days, heart begins to beat. Brain's forming at 35 days.
I mean, here's the thing. I don't know. I just think, I don't know.
Is it wrong for all women in all places?
No, of course not.
No, they can make up their own mind?
Definitely cases where I think abortion is okay.
We are a nation that is quickly losing its moral compass. Common sense is being thrown out the window. We're a nation that believes no child should be left behind, but we've aborted over 61 million of them. We're a nation that weeps for the illegal children that are being separated from their parents at the border, yet we fight for a woman to kill her offspring. As long as we teach children that it's okay to kill children in the womb, we'll never convince them that it's wrong to kill children in a classroom. We live in a day and age where animals have more rights than humans. It's a crime to kill an eagle's egg, a felony to destroy a turtle's egg. Yet if a woman decides to kill her own child, we call her brave, but we say it's health care and a human right.
Why do we use these kinds of pictures when we're talking to people about abortion? The short answer is that abortion is a human rights crisis that kills thousands of innocent children each day.
Because the abortion industry is designed to hide the humanity of these children, we have a duty to honor them by letting their faces be seen. I know what you might be thinking.
Pictures of abortion disrespect the dignity of the unborn.
Or the images are alienating.
Or maybe they just make you feel uncomfortable. But let me tell you a story. Not long ago, some pro-life friends of mine were doing outreach on a college campus in Florida. They had signs showing the victims of abortion, and they were engaging in loving dialogue with passersby. A young woman approached, and she said this.
Last year, my friend was yelling and swearing at you guys for being out here. But soon after, she got pregnant, and she couldn't bring herself to have an abortion because of the photos that she saw that day.
She was angry at pro-lifers for showing the reality of abortion. But when she got pregnant and wanted an abortion, she remembered the photos and could not go through with the abortion. Because she saw those children's photos, her baby is alive today.
This story illustrates the strongest argument for the use of abortion victim imagery. It saves lives. Stories like this aren't the exception to our experience, they are the norm.
In fact, Protect Life Michigan, along with many other organizations like Created Equal and the Canadian Center for Bioethical Reform, we have shown abortion victim imagery to millions and had hundreds of thousands of conversations with pro-choice people. In those conversations, we see 30% of people change their position on abortion. And we know that hundreds of lives have been saved because of these images.
The evidence for this strategy isn't limited to our own internal data and results. A 2015 study out of Canada showed that when people simply see abortion victim imagery, even without any conversation, up to 67% of people have a more negative view of abortion.
But if this evidence doesn't convince you, maybe history will. For centuries, virtually every successful social reform movement has used imagery to make people feel the way they ought to feel about injustice.
Take William Wilberforce. He ended the slave trade in Great Britain by showing documentary evidence, picture drawings, first-hand accounts of suffering, showing the reality of slavery as explicitly as possible.
Fast forward to the civil rights movement. Emmett Till was tortured to death after being accused of whistling at a white woman. When his mother saw his mutilated body, she insisted on having an open casket funeral. She knew the power of that image to change minds. Tens of thousands of people visited his open casket, and millions more saw his photo in print. Emmett became a catalyst for the civil rights movement, even motivating Rosa Parks not to give up her seat.
There are so many other examples. In each case, people faced the injustice by seeing the victims, and it stirred them to end the injustice.
Now, I want to return to those objections I mentioned earlier. To those who worry about disrespecting the dignity of the baby, I urge you to remember that abortion forever steals the life of a real person, someone the abortion industry tried to deliberately keep hidden. The greatest tool that we have to dignify them is to show the world their humanity.
Dr. Monica Miller, a nationally known pro-life leader and faithful Catholic, said it best. To expose the injustice done to these little someones is the highest possible respect that can be shown to that aborted child. It allows that little person to speak the injustice that happened to her, to prove that she lived, and allows her brief life to change the world for the better.
Was Wilberforce dishonoring the victims of slavery? Was Emmett Till's mother dishonoring him? In many other circumstances, we recognize that showing the victims is crucial to eliminating the injustice. The Holocaust, racial injustice, genocide, even animal abuse. We must be careful not to be inconsistent.
Perhaps you worry that victim imagery is too graphic, or that it actually hurts our cause by alienating the very people that we're trying to reach. Studies and experience have proven this to not be true. But we should keep in mind that social reform isn't about marketing or attracting people to you. It's about pushing them away from the injustice.
At Protect Life Michigan, we aren't here to make being pro-life more palatable. We are here to make abortion less palatable. To those who are uncomfortable with the photos, know that is exactly how you should feel. We shouldn't feel comfortable with abortion.
Even when uncomfortable, we're called to do the most effective work that we can to oppose injustice. That means that until we can discredit the data, the historical precedents of other social movements, and the testimonies of lives being saved, we have an obligation to use these images.
These small, broken bodies are crying out to us for justice. The world was never the same after they saw the brutalized body of a young man named Emmett Till. By showing the world the reality of the violence of abortion, we can ensure that the world will never be the same once again.
Let's look,
Let's know,
and let's show the rest of the world
so that the killing might end.
It is important to remember that everyone's right to life should be respected and protected, and that includes those who are still inside the womb. Our country's history is steeped in a movement that celebrates and advocates for the sanctity of life. It's imperative for us to continue shedding light on this issue. We'd like to drive home the reasons for why this is such a vital battle for us to continue to take up, and why we fight so hard to ensure that the smallest and weakest among us are valued.
A century and a half ago, we fought a civil war and amended the Constitution to ensure that every human being could enjoy equal protection of the laws. But today, some states have denied that protection to children in the womb through legalized abortion. From the moment of fertilization, those victims of abortion are fully human. And in our legal tradition, every living human being is a human person. The Constitution says that no state can deprive any person the equal protection of the laws. And that is why legalized abortion is unconstitutional. In 2022, in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, the 1973 decision that required states to allow abortion. Dobbs held that the Constitution does not confer a right to abortion through the 14th Amendment. But as significant as Dobbs was, it corrected only one of Roe's legal errors. You see, in order to wrongly say that the Constitution guaranteed a right to abortion, the Roe court first said that preborn children are not persons entitled to equal protection. If personhood is established, Justice Blackmun wrote in Roe, then the case for abortion collapses, for the fetus's right to life would then be guaranteed specifically by the 14th Amendment. Now, the justices in Dobbs were not asked to address the issue of preborn personhood, and the court didn't have to answer that question to decide the case. But we must ask, are preborn children persons within the original public meaning of the 14th Amendment? Is abortion unconstitutional? The 14th Amendment was ratified in 1868 after the Civil War to ensure that no human being would be denied basic legal rights. The amendment says states may not deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person the equal protection of the laws. To understand the amendment's application to preborn children as persons, let's use three different interpretive tools. First, definitions from when the 14th Amendment was ratified. Second, historic state practices related to abortion. And third, the drafter's understanding of the amendment. First, definitions. According to dictionaries of common and legal usage at the time of the 14th Amendment's adoption, the term person was largely interchangeable with human being. So for example, the 1864 edition of Noah Webster's American Dictionary of the English Language defined the term person as relating especially to a living human being, a man, woman, or child, an individual of the human race. In legal usage, every human being was considered a natural person. The authoritative treatise writer William Blackstone actually began his discourse on the rights of persons with a discussion of the preborn child's rights to life and personal security. According to Blackstone, life is a right inherent by nature in every individual. For Blackstone, if human life existed, then legal personhood existed also. There was no distinction between biological human life and legal personhood. The 14th Amendment, similar to the Civil Rights Act of 1866 that it was meant to support, codified equal protection of the fundamental rights of persons, as these had been expounded by Blackstone and other treatise writers. Second, state practice. Centuries of common law practice consistently treated the preborn child as a person whenever it would be for his benefit. So based on authorities like Lord Coke and Blackstone, as well as landmark English cases, state high courts in the years before 1868 declared that the preborn human being throughout pregnancy is a person, and hence under civil and common law, to all intents and purposes, a child as much as if born. At common law, abortion was unlawful at all stages of pregnancy and was typically criminally indictable as soon as a woman was quick with child, a phrase that had shifting meanings. Some courts understood this to be as soon as the child was alive, or quick. Other courts understood this to be as soon as the child's life could be detected, sometimes called quickening. But this rule was designed to protect life as soon as it could be shown to exist, not to exclude protection prior to that point. In any event, the quickening distinction was largely discarded in the statutory reforms leading up to the 14th Amendment's adoption, so that by 1866, Chief Justice Tenney of the Maine Supreme Court could accurately report that the quickening distinction has been abandoned by jurists in all countries where an enlightened jurisprudence exists in practice. When the 14th Amendment was adopted in 1868, the states widely recognized preborn children as persons at all stages of pregnancy. Nearly every state had codified criminal prohibitions against abortion by statute, and at least 28 jurisdictions labeled abortion an offense against the person. In 23 states and 6 territories, laws referred to the preborn individual as an infant or child. In fact, the same Ohio legislature that ratified the 14th Amendment called abortion at any stage nothing less than child murder. So at the time of the 14th Amendment's adoption, nearly every state understood person to include prenatal life. Third, the framers' understanding of the amendment's legal application. The framers expected the 14th Amendment's guarantees of equal protection and due process to protect every member of the human species within U.S. jurisdiction. Senator Jacob Howard, who sponsored the amendment in the Senate, declared that the amendment's purpose was to disable a state from depriving not merely a citizen of the United States, but any person, whoever he may be, of life, liberty, and property without due process. Even the lowest and most despised of the human race were guaranteed equal protection. As Justice Hugo Black later put it, the history of the 14th Amendment proves that people were told that its purpose was to protect weak and helpless human beings. One mistaken approach to constitutional interpretation might claim that the 14th Amendment doesn't protect preborn children because it was most immediately intended to protect Black Americans from discriminatory, unequal treatment. But the amendment's framers deliberately chose the broader term persons to protect any human being who might be denied due process or equal protection. Another mistaken argument claims that the preborn can't be protected by the 14th Amendment because it begins by declaring that all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States. But the Citizenship Clause simply defines which persons are citizens, entitled to the privileges and immunities of citizenship. It doesn't define personhood or say that only citizens are persons. Indeed, it clearly acknowledges persons who are not citizens. And the Due Process and Equal Protection Clauses expressly protect any person, not just citizens. Finally, constitutional rights are typically only enforceable against the government, not against private actors. And this is called the state action doctrine. So a state's failure to protect an individual against private violence isn't usually a constitutional violation. So how could abortion be unconstitutional? Well, the Supreme Court has long recognized that the state may not, of course, selectively deny its protective services to certain disfavored minorities without violating the Equal Protection Clause. State laws that allow elective abortion deprive a disfavored class of human beings of the equal protection of the laws. Legalized abortion discriminates against preborn children because it means our general laws against homicide don't apply when the victim is an unborn child. And those are precisely the sort of wrongs that the 14th Amendment was designed to resolve. Equal protection for the preborn is not a new idea either. It's been around since before Roe itself. Even President Reagan agreed that the 14th Amendment applies to the preborn. He actually issued a proclamation in 1988 in which he said the well-being and future of our country demand that protection of the innocents must be guaranteed, and that the personhood of the unborn be declared and defended throughout the land. Every level and branch of government has a role to play in ensuring equal protection. Each state retains its primary duty to protect the inalienable right to life. But there's an important and inescapable federal role as well. First, the 14th Amendment specifically grants Congress power to enforce by appropriate legislation the amendment's guarantees. The Supreme Court explained in 1880 that whatever legislation is adapted to carry out the equal protection of the laws against state denial or invasion is brought within the domain of congressional power. Second, a pro-life president who understands the Constitution's protections for life can instruct each department and agency within the executive branch to recognize and protect human persons in the womb. And finally, courts should apply the original meaning of the Equal Protection Clause to extend those protections to unborn children. Preborn children are constitutionally entitled to due process and the equal protection of the laws. The Constitution, properly interpreted, prohibits abortion through the 14th Amendment, and everyone who swears an oath to uphold the Constitution has a duty to ensure those rights are protected. In America, abortion is unconstitutional.
On June 24, 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court released its Dobbs decision. The majority opinion emphatically dispelled the myth that Roe created a constitutional right to an abortion. That ruling sent Roe and Casey to the dung heap of history. While pro-lifers momentarily rejoiced in that historic decision, it became plainly evident that after 50 years of legalized abortion, the overwhelming majority of Americans no longer possessed a pro-life ethic. The church has been predominantly silent on the life issue for nearly 50 years. At the same time, the pro-life community has primarily talked about abortion in the abstract, fearful of offending the culture with victim imagery and its horrific consequences. So why are we astonished when voters equate abortion with nothing more than a woman's right to choose how she disposes of her unwanted pregnancy? This is what motivated us to produce the Case for Life video series, to help educate individuals on basic embryology, the reality of abortion procedures, its human risk, the lifelong impact of choosing to abort one's child, the grotesque reality of the victims of abortion, and the human rights of every preborn child. We must never forget, if we want to make abortion unthinkable, if we want to help restore a culture that respects the inherent dignity of every life, born and preborn, then we must be willing to act. Every cultural transformation requires that we, the people, engage in the work. One life can make a difference. Together, let us praise our way to make the killing of an innocent human life unthinkable. Praise is an acronym: P for prayer, R for read, A for and, I for influence, S for serve, E for expect. Here's how we praise our way to a pro-life culture. Pray continuously that hearts and minds are awakened to the reality of what abortion is, the intentional killing of an innocent human life. Read to educate oneself on the basics of the Case for Life, and then influence others through simple conversations with people you know. The goal is to influence their thinking, not win an argument. Serve actively somewhere in the pro-life community. Finally, expect God to move through our spirit-led engagement. I invite you to become a history maker and participate in the most significant human rights issue of our lifetime. One life can indeed make a difference. Your life can make a difference. Together, let us praise our way to making the killing of an innocent human life unthinkable.